Hello, everyone. Welcome to Design Together, a podcast exploring how designers work together. I am your host, Abby Ryan Guido, a designer and educator working in Philadelphia, collaborating everywhere. Well, I'm really excited about today's show. It's no surprise I myself collaborated with many folks to dream up the concept of this podcast, and Lisa was one of the very first people that inspired me to further explore this topic. Lisa Gottfried is currently an educator at the New Technology High School in Napa, where she teaches digital design. She's been recognized by the Global Innovation Collection for various projects that she had spearheaded that we're going to touch on today. Lisa is also both an Adobe Education Leader as well as an Adobe Master Teacher. Welcome, Lisa, to the show.
Thank you for inviting me. It's so nice to be here.
Awesome. So I think the best place to start talking and having a conversation is to rehash some of our very first conversations we had. I, too, am an Adobe Education Leader. And at my very first summit, I was fortunate enough to hear Lisa talking about two projects that she's involved in, one being the Lighted Art Project and the other the Create-a-thon. And I was just blown away that Lisa was accomplishing so much in a high school classroom. So I did what any good collaborator does. I cornered Lisa as we were getting on a bus. And I made her sit with me and share all of her secrets. So I think that's what happened. Is that what happened? It's kind of what I remember.
Exactly what happened.
I pretty much said, you have to tell me. So yeah. So I thought that we could start today because, you know, when you were talking to me about how you teach and what the school is like, it's something that was totally new to me, which I would love you to talk about because I'm guessing if it was new to me, it's probably new to a lot of our listeners. Could you talk a little bit about the school you're at and how they teach?
So New Technology High School has been around for, I think now, almost 25 years. And they were one of the very first project-based learning schools in the country, in the world. I mean, project-based learning, you know, it started in the 70s, so it's not absolutely new. But I think there was a movement where High Tech High down in San Diego was sort of born at the same time as New Tech High was born up here in Northern California. And it was really about, like, so what does the community need and how do we make partnerships between organizations and businesses that are in the community, and how do we train students to really be ready for the real world? And so I think that's what sort of was birthed out of that particular idea, is that, like, we're moving into the 21st century. What is it that kids need at that point when they were just starting out? What is it that students need in order to really be successful out in whatever's happening? You know, so much has happened in the last 25 years. It's pretty crazy, but so we're wall-to-wall project-based learning, meaning every classroom is rooted in some kind of authentic real-world project. And every content area is covered through teamwork, through collaboration with one another. There's certain learning outcomes that we assess that go beyond just the knowledge of the actual content itself. We're always assessing for oral communication. How are your presentation skills and your speaking skills? How is your collaboration? And then how is your agency? Like, how do you own your own learning in the process of working on these variety of projects that you'd be working on?
Which I imagine is hard for a high school student. You're talking about your own agency, like talking to college students. Myself, that's challenging. So that must be really hard.
Well, it's an ongoing conversation. You have to start that in high school. You have to start with, like, okay, what are the strategies that you need to put in place in order to push yourself, to challenge yourself? What are the strategies you have to put into place in order to seek feedback for your work? There's a whole variety of things that are on the rubrics there that we look at, and it gets them thinking and starting to sort of amass those skills that we hope that someone would have by the time they leave both high school and college, right?
So is the school a public school? Is it a charter? How do students end up there?
We are a public school.
Okay.
So we're under the Napa Valley Unified School District.
And is that something that they apply to get into your school in particular, or it's just done by catchment and that's where they landed?
It's a choice school, so
Okay.
you apply to go, and then there's a random lottery to get in, so there's no preference. And our particular population of students looks exactly like the comprehensive high school in terms of like percentages of people of color, percentages of people in certain brackets of financial situations, things like that.
Got it. And when you started there, did you have an experience with project-based learning? Was it totally new to you? Like, did you go because of that? Like, how did you end up there?
I homeschooled my kids for 7 years.
Wow.
So for me, like everything was a project. It had to be because I had 2 kids and I had to keep them interested in whatever we were learning. So, and then I was recruited over a series of years. I'd been asked over and over again, would you please come and teach at New Tech? And I would always say, like, I'm just not ready for that, and you can't pay me enough, and all that stuff. And finally, I went to an interview, and I thought, well, I'll just go, and if I don't, I'll just say no if they want to hire me. I just, let's just see what options there are. And I went to the interview, and the kinds of questions that they were asking me were so amazing. And I was so impressed by what they wanted to focus on that I was like, wow, I think I need to become a public school teacher. I think I never would imagine myself that. And I couldn't see myself becoming a teacher in a traditional school in any way, shape, or form. That was one of the reasons we started homeschooling, was to get away from some of the ways that traditional teaching happens. And then there was this like crazy little school of 400 kids who was doing really innovative things. And I was like, I could get into that. I could actually enjoy doing something like that. I actually have to. So it was like a call for me.
And how long have you been there now?
I'm in my 8th year.
Wow. Awesome.
Yeah.
One thing I remember from when we were talking on that bus, you were sharing kind of how projects get started, because there was something that I took right from that conversation, which was having the students apply for jobs in the classroom for projects. And it was that moment of like, duh. Like, of course, like that's such a great experience. So I've been doing that now in my class now for 2 semesters. I've done it and it's been great. But I'd love you to talk about kind of how a project, and maybe you can use one of the examples of one of the projects that I mentioned earlier, and just talk a little bit about how it starts and how everyone gets involved and how it kind of works through.
Well, I'm a career tech ed teacher, so we're always writing resumes and developing interview skills is actually one of the learning goals if you're a career tech ed teacher. More so even than preparing students for college. Like career tech ed is about careers, right?
Sure.
So it made sense to me, and I'd seen it in many different iterations with some other PBL teachers at my school, how they'd written out qualifications on a piece of paper, but nothing had ever gone that far, like where you actually had to write a resume for the job. And so, like, when you talk about PBL, you're always talking about what's an authentic bit of learning. So one has to ask, why would you write a resume? Like, there has to be a real reason to have to write a resume.
For sure.
Well, okay.
A job.
So what if we treated this particular project that we're working on? I was approached by the Napa Valley Lighted Art Festival one year. Did the students they needed like countdown clocks for in between the shows. And they were going to project artwork on, 20 different buildings in downtown Napa. They were hoping that it would bring a large crowd into the community and sort of help the businesses that were down there. So rather than doing like the typical little Christmas lights display, they wanted something that was like high tech and just super exciting. And they'd seen these projected lighted art festivals all over the world. They're like, we want to do this in Napa. And I said, yes, of course. Like, we will do the countdown clocks for you this year.
Sure.
Absolutely, yes. Come and talk to our students. Tell them what you want. Tell us what you want, and we'll work on it. We'll spit it back out at you, and it'll be awesome. And that particular year, we had the major fires in 2017, and it was a total failure of a project. Like, my kids made these amazing countdown clocks. They were never used.
Aww.
It dropped us at the last minute. It left a really bitter taste in my mouth. And I went back to them the next year and said, can we try again? Because there's so much here. It's so rich with possibilities.
Sure. It's a great project.
And I think because they felt so guilty about how they'd handled it, they were like, we'll give you a building.
Wow.
Okay, we've got a building. I have no idea what that entails. I have no idea how long that project's going to take. I just know we have a deadline to get the thing done by whenever the Parks and Recs department wanted it done.
Now, did you have any experience projecting art before? And
So
this kind of,
never, no. But they also offered the people who were consulting on that particular event were a production studio out of London, and they offered to pay for them to mentor my kids.
That's amazing.
And so I was like all over it because yes, we'll do that. We will. And I think again there was sort of a little bit of ill will about the year before, and they were like, "Let us make it up to you. We're going to do this for you." And it was the biggest success, I think, of any project that I've ever done. The biggest project we've ever done. It lasted an entire semester.
And are your semesters half a year? What are they quarter semesters?
Half a year. And I was just in tears when I saw the artwork projected on the building. I just could not believe that my students had done that. And the amazing thing is, okay, so you have 25 kids or however many you have in a class. It was not all on me to do all of the work. So it was a great thing to be able to say to the students, look, this is yours. I'm going to help you, but you are going to run the show. You are going to make all the decisions with the help of mentors. I will not leave you stranded. We'll make sure that you get the right people in front of you to help you. Because I've never done this before. You've never done this before.
And I love those moments. Like, I love to be able to say to my students, I actually don't know. I have no idea, but we're going to learn together, and you give me info and I'll give you. And I think it's really great for them to know that. I think it breaks down some of those barriers of like the teacher's up high and the students somewhere low. And
yes.
So on that, you said you have 25 students. Now, are they all working together? Are they in small groups? How do you figure out how that logistically works?
We decided on groups because we've done PBL for so many years, I'd done it for so many years, you kind of know what the ideal team size is. It's somewhere between 4 to 6 students, at least at the high school level, because if someone's absent, you don't want a team that's so small that if someone's absent, you've got one person sitting there working by themselves.
They can't do anything.
Right?
Yeah.
And you don't want too many because it's really hard to make decisions when you have too many people. It's like 4 to 5 is actually probably the right size.
Mm-hmm.
We met with a project manager. We met with a professional project manager and said, we've never done a project this big before. What do we need to know? What systems do we need to have in place? And they showed us about project management and about agile project management and how you do scrum meetings, and we just became students.
That's great.
You know, and like, how does one manage a big project like this? We've never done anything like this before.
And so when the students get broken off into those teams, is that when they're working on a resume to think about what position within the team they want to be?
So we did establish some really clear roles. And again, some of this was born out of understanding how project-based learning works. When you give team roles, things run more smoothly, and there's certain roles that need to be handled, like one person needs to be in charge of the whole group.
What do you call that role?
Well, in the real world, you would call that a project manager or a product manager.
Okay.
Product managers are usually like in charge of the whole piece of software that they're developing. Like at Adobe, like you'd have a product manager that owns Photoshop, right?
Sure. So
product manager in our situation was the final product of the Lighted Art Festival. So that was like 1 or 2 students that we hired to be in charge of the whole thing. So there were 2 product managers in charge of the whole class. Then we had project managers, or you could call them team leaders if you want to.
Okay.
Then we had, we had technicians, so people who would be willing to do the research. Like if we needed to figure out how to do something on the computer, they would research it first and then teach their team how to do it, or they would troubleshoot technical problems. And then we also had a kid who, the role wasn't actually set up, but he asked if he could be the documentarian and do like a documentary about what we were doing.
Of the whole process. Wow.
So he was on his own team because we thought, yeah, we need that. And then I'm trying to think, we had designers. So we had creative directors that would make the final decision about how stuff would look. So we just looked to the real world. Like, what are the real roles that happen and how do teams operate in in the world of technology, and then we just stole those for ourselves.
just like I took it from you.
Exactly.
So I imagine that not everyone is 100% excited about the position they end up getting. Has that happened before? And
we didn't know what was going to happen, like who was going to apply for what position. So we went through, everybody wrote their resume. We wrote up little descriptions for each particular role, because that's what you do in the real world, and then taught them about how you cater your resume to that particular description so that they'd have those skills. And then they actually, instead of doing a one-to-one interview or maybe with a panel, they got up and they did presentations about their strengths, their weaknesses, where they think there are areas of growth, where they think they might be challenged in the job, and any questions that they might have.
What grade level are these students?
Mostly 10th through 12th, so it was a variety. Mostly 11th and 12th graders with a couple 10th graders thrown in. The 10th graders were incredibly intimidated, and we eventually brought them in and told them everything would be okay. Took care of them. And so I'm always looking to the real world, why do I have to start things from scratch? I want to know, how does somebody who is a projection artist actually start the work? Where do they start? So that's where we started. Was the projection artist came and talked about here's my process. Here are some things you might want to think about as you're designing this thing. You want, heavily contrasted things. You want to think about ambient light that's there at the building that you're going to be at. All kinds of things like that, formats and stuff like that.
Sure. Once you said ambient lighting, I'm like, oh yeah, that makes sense. You probably should go to the location at the time it's going to be projected and see what it feels like.
Exactly. Yeah. But that's not anything I would have known, or the kids.
Exactly. I didn't think about that at all either. I was thinking how to organize the files.
The first weeks, I would say, in this project, I just kept meeting with the product managers. So I had 2 students who were in charge of the class. Mm-hmm. And we would meet and go okay, what do we need to do this week? Or what, let's lay out our calendar here. We know that we have this deadline. If we know this deadline's happening, what deadlines do we have to set throughout the next couple months in order to meet it? And even we'd grab some of the team leaders as well, and we'd have a leadership meeting. So it would be 7 kids.
Okay.
And they'd make all the decisions for the class. I'd be okay, how do you want to get graded on this? Let's look at that together. You guys can make the decision. What makes sense for this week for grading? And then they would decide.
Do they do any peer grading at that level? Do they give each other feedback?
There's definitely peer feedback. We can talk a little bit about the assessment process, but oftentimes, I would meet one-on-one with students to just, with the rubrics in hand that had already been decided, we'd be okay, for the next 2 weeks, your agency is going to be graded on, especially in the beginning, seeking out feedback for your work about your new ideas and being willing to iterate. We all knew that ahead of time because we'd all agreed upon it. So everybody knew that that's what they were going to be graded on. So when we meet 2 weeks later, we'd say, okay, let's look at the rubric here. How did you do in seeking feedback or in your iteration process? And then they'd say, well, I think I fell in this particular column. If there was a disagreement, I didn't think that they were where they needed to be, maybe they grade themselves way too low.
That's what I actually find that more often.
Yes.
It's usually not the other way. They're usually, I'm I have a question on my evaluations that every semester I say to the students before they fill them out, I think you all have worked as hard as you possibly could. Given whatever circumstance in life, you all put in so much and I'm so proud. And the first question is
yes.
Do you think you were successful in this class? And I cannot get the highest grade. You get letters and I cannot get the highest one. They will not say they did the best they could have done. I don't get it.
That's an important lesson, right? So I told them that basically their grades were their pay. So if we disagreed, we'd bring in maybe the team leader or maybe we'd bring in the whole group. And we'd look at the rubric together. We'd say, do you all agree with what this person's self-assessing here? And if they didn't, they would bring evidence, because I don't always sit with every group and don't know what the evidence is.
Sure.
But, like a team leader could be like, well, that's not true because you helped out here on this particular part of the process. And here's where you ask questions. You have to have evidence to back it up. You can't just, it's not a subjective.
You can't just say, well, I really like Lisa, so
Right, exactly.
she gets an A.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But to speak to your point about like low assessments of self-assessments, isn't that an amazing skill that students could walk away knowing, is how to not undervalue themselves?
Oh, yeah.
When they
totally.
go out into the real world and have to negotiate their pay.
I know.
So
I
used to say to them, look, the first time that we do this, if you undervalue yourself, I will accept your low assessment of yourself. And that will be the grade that you will get. Then once we write down what you think you're worth and you've gotten that grade, I'm going to tell you what I would have given you and why. And then I don't want you to ever undervalue yourself again.
I love that. I'm going to be going back and listening to this episode because I'm going to try some of this because I can't figure it out. I'm like, they work so hard. And
yes.
Yeah, and it totally does. I ran a negotiation workshop last spring just to kind of help them with that, because I know, you're like, yes, you can pay me that. Great. Like just right away, just saying yes and going with it and not stepping back. So, all right. So back to the project.
Yes.
So they all had their roles. So how did it turn out that first year?
Like I said, it was, we had, so this was actually the second year,
The second year, yes.
Second year was absolutely incredible. Like magic. I just don't know. The people who applied for the jobs that they applied for, it was a perfect match. And I tried to give everybody the job that they wanted. And in most cases, like if there was an empty position, I would go to that person and say, I know you really wanted to be creative director, but would you be open to being the resource manager or our PR person? Would you be open to that? We really need that. And I feel like you have those skills that we need for that. And they usually say yes. And everybody
You're
was
so much
happy.
nicer than me, Lisa. You don't want to know what I did? I had a student who said, no matter what, I do not want to be the production manager.
Oh.
And you know what I made her? But she's amazing, and she's probably listening, and she knows I'm talking about her. But but I did that because I had the student before, and she was quite disorganized. And I knew if you were in charge of organizing a whole team, you're not going to let them down. And so there was a reason. I wasn't just being, just trying to be hard. But so you are kinder than me, because I sometimes just do the opposite.
Well, there are times where we spend so much time on the resumes and on the presentations that I think the kids get really clear. And even during a presentation, we might have a student who says, have you considered being a team leader? Like, why did you not put that on your resume? And then they stop and they think, well, yeah, actually, I'd be willing to be a team leader, or whatever it is.
It's funny, I have a feeling you and I have been similar, where like, I've just been outspoken. So I've always jumped into those roles.
Yeah.
And it always surprises me, actually, when the students don't want to. And then they have that moment where they're like, oh, I would do it. I just don't have they don't have that little, extra push to say, yes, me.
Yes.
So I love that it's given the other students the opportunity to call them out and to say, why wouldn't you want to do this? And
but here's the amazing thing is that it's a 2-year class, so you can take it more than once. You can actually take it for 2 years. So we've developed sort of in that process a way of funneling leadership through. So we might say to a 10th grader, we are really impressed with what you've done this particular year. Would you consider coming back and being a product manager? Or would you? So we start to recruit, and there's like a funneling of, or like you get a really quiet kid who you're like, look, I know you were super quiet, but you have some amazing skills here. Next year, would you be willing to take on a team? And we've had great success with that kind of approach.
What was the actual show like that second year?
It was mind-blowing. It was like, look at the artwork. It's on a 70-foot building, and it was so good. I mean, I just have to say,
that must have been so amazing for the students to
it was
be out there. And
It was one of the favorite buildings. Like, people were like, "You're kidding. What? This is like the best building in the show. These are high school kids." We're like,
That's
"Yeah,
amazing.
we did it."
That's awesome. And then since that, have you been continuing to do it? How has it changed over the years?
We did it one more year. So we did it last year. And then this year in January, because of COVID, we did not. But we're planning again for next year.
Great. Do you have any big goals with it? Is it changing or is it still the one building?
I think it's just fluid right now because we don't know with COVID how things are going to be handled. There's also like issues of you have to raise money to pay for the projector and to pay for the person to staff the projector. There's some costs involved. So we've had to apply for grants and ask for help out of the community for what we need in order to actually have the building. So
do the students get involved at all in any of the fundraising, or is that
they
totally
do? Yeah.
separate?
I mean, I've had some kids who it's really hard to convince a kid like, "Hey, let's write a grant together."
It doesn't sound like fun to them.
But I have had students like sit in on meetings and present what we've done in the past and bat their eyeballs at
So you can't say no when you have the kids in there. Awesome. All right, let's talk about the other big project that I had mentioned, which is the Create-a-thon, which I think is kind of your baby. Tell us about it.
We've done school-wide projects every year. Usually when we come back in January, that first week of school, we do some kind of like design-based school-wide project.
So everyone at the whole school does it?
So like one year we reimagine like what would school look like if you could reimagine school, and we spend the week going through the design process, making prototypes. Everybody does it.
Wow. Do they jump from like class to class doing this? Like, are they in history and?
Yeah, there are no classes, so you're with your cohort for the week. And there's a variety of ways that we mix it up and look at each other's work and critique and give feedbacks and stuff like that. And it's a really cool thing. So we asked last year, we asked the year before when we did the second year of the Light Art Festival, could we please have that week? We'll plan everything. Principal's like, heck yeah, you can have, if you're going to do the work, yes, you can do that. And our vision was that we'd get everybody in the school to somehow play on Adobe products.
Okay.
It was like going to be just a day-long thing rather than a couple days or a week-long thing. And at the end of the day, whatever artwork they'd made, we'd include that in the Lighted Art Festival. So it was like, hey, you guys, we're going to do this design day. We know that not everybody's an artist, and we know that not everybody's into this, but wouldn't it be cool if your work was shown on a 70-foot building next week in the Lighted Art Festival? That's, and we hoped that was enough motivation to sort of get people to experiment with all sorts of things that were Adobe-based. And so we figured out how to get like enough computers with enough. So each team could at least have a computer to work on.
Okay.
We had tutorials online. We had 10 people from Adobe who came and ran workshops the whole day.
And was there a prompt for what they were creating, or was it totally up to that cohort, that team, to come up with an idea?
It had to do with the theme for the Lighted Art Festival. So I can't remember what the first year's theme was, but we basically said to them, look, we're doing this Lighted Art Festival. Here's what we've made already. We'd like to show your stuff at the end of our show. You've got 6 hours, go. With some help, and with an...
And what is the age group of students? Is it throughout?
So this was 9th through 12th. And then we were like, oh, and by the way, we're going to invite 4th and 5th graders to come and collaborate with you. And they're
why not?
Teams.
Sure, why not?
But that's another couple hundred students.
So how did that go? Well, that's good though, because then the students have a chance to use those leadership skills with the younger students. Oh,
totally. They ran the whole show. They planned it from the very beginning. So while we were also doing the Lighted Art Festival, we were also planning that particular event.
Okay.
And we had even different teams for that, like a team that was just doing T-shirts and signs, and a team that was doing, like the curriculum for the day. And those had separate leaders. And so that was crazy too, just having two separate teams to be on. We kind of figured out everybody needed to just stay on the same team. And
With the same people that they were doing got it.
And so it was, first of all, it helped with our grant writing because we were reaching out to another school, to 4th and 5th graders. So, of course, people were going to support us because we were involving other students in the community. It also motivated some of those kids who were just not that into design, but they were really into mentoring the 4th and 5th graders. And that's what kind of we were hoping, is that it would inspire some of the high schoolers to engage, because they've got little kids looking up at them and saying, "Whoa, that's so cool. You can do that technology. Show me."
What year was this happening in?
It wasn't last year, but the year before. So,
so those 4th and 5th graders are not old enough yet to be in your classroom.
No, but they were like, "Oh my God, we're coming to New Tech." So it was great recruitment. There's all sorts of different reasons it was fun. Yeah, and the product managers, so we had 2 sets of product managers. One owned the Create-a-thon and one owned the Lighted Art Festival.
And then how did the day go? Were they collecting stuff at the end?
It was incredible. We had incredible work. We included many of the pieces of artwork, not all of them, but many of the artwork wound up in the show. We had a scramble for a week to get it into the show. And
sure.
And students learned a whole bunch. And not only students, but teachers. Teachers learned what they could do with the Adobe products, because we all had it. We had Adobe Creative Cloud for everybody at the school, but it was so underutilized. And now there was a reason to engage with it. So it became fascinating just to watch teachers working alongside of students. We told them, "You are not really in charge today. We have a whole team of students who are in charge. You can be a learner too."
That's fun.
And it was super cool.
So that was the first year. Now, have you done it since that first time?
Yeah, we did it again last year. And this time it was just the Create-a-thon the first year.
Okay.
Just within our school and with this other elementary school. And then we decided, well, we could expand this. We could include people from all over the world. All they need to do is get on a Zoom call.
Right.
And participate with us. Like, we'll roll it out to everybody in the school at the same time as we roll it out to everyone around the world, whoever wants to participate.
So was it still connected to the Lighted Art show, or was it separate?
It was.
Okay.
And we decided this time, if you submitted artwork, it would get into the show no matter what.
Okay.
So no one would get left out.
Wow. That's a lot of stuff to add.
Yeah. And that was amazing too. We had students from Canada. We had students from Vietnam, East Coast, West Coast. They were all in their own classrooms as little satellite locations of the creative, working on the same day at the same time.
That's awesome.
With the same tutorials.
Were they sharing their work with each other? Were they communicating at all, the students, or was there not time?
We had one of those little, have you ever seen like the episode of The Big Bang Theory where Sheldon's walking around? Like,
I haven't watched it. I was just looking like, should I watch it? Is it worth watching?
He's afraid he's going to get sick, so he makes a little robot of himself, and it's like an iPad with his picture, and it's rolling around in the world, a Sheldon bot. Right?
I can imagine it.
Right. So we did a little Sheldon bot, and we just rolled this iPad around all the classrooms, and kids could talk to one another and like show their work. They'd be like, what are you doing over in Virginia? And they'd show it on the screen, and then they'd get feedback from other people who were in the Zoom room or people who were in the classroom. They could ask questions. That's really awesome. Cool. Yeah.
So did you think, what was the difference between the 2 years? Like, did you feel like having people from all over, that it was useful, or did it make it too complex?
They were both really different. We also collected artwork like for a couple months leading up to the Create-a-thon from kids all over the world. So we had, just because I have contacts all over the world, I just know people and I'd been promoting it. I know educators from all over the place.
Exactly.
So they would send their like drawings to us, and we would change it into a motion graphic, lighted, sort of really cool moving piece. But it was their drawing that was being lit up and made into a motion graphic.
How many of these pieces did you have? Just can't imagine how much time this took to...
I would say we had like 50 drawings.
That's a lot.
Yeah. And mostly the people who worked on the Create-a-thon, the kids who worked on that, the tutorials helped them to animate it themselves.
Okay.
So we even said to them, like, if you want to draw on a piece of paper, here's how you would do it. Here's how you would scan it in. And here's all the steps that you would do to make that into a motion graphic. So we just did that for some of the kids, like in Switzerland and in Finland. We had a couple people all over the world. We had students that were just submitting work just through our website, and then whenever we had time, we would just make it move.
So do you get feedback from students after projects? Like, do you know how they felt about these? How do you kind of evaluate the class yourself?
Like I said, oral communication is really important. So both years we've had presentations to the community as the artist.
Okay.
Here's what our process is. Here's what we thought about it. Here's where we struggled. Because in PBL, reflection is a really important part of the learning process. It actually helps the brain to retain the information when you reflect when you're done. So that's always been a regular part of our practice in the classroom. So this time, the reflection just kind of happened with the community.
Okay.
And it was more public. So they got to talk about their process and answer
And that
questions.
was after the show was up?
It was up for a week, and I think they had the artists speak like the first couple days of the show.
I love that.
So they got to publicly talk about their process. And it was pretty powerful. Like they all said it was the most powerful learning that they'd ever had because it wasn't for the grade. It was for the community.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
That's what we do this for. So
Yes. Yeah.
it must have felt great.
Yeah.
And then are you continuing this project? Is it living on?
We started off last semester with high hopes that we were going to continue doing the global Create-a-thon, but maybe move it to online. And we've since decided that it's just too much. It's given our schedule and how little we meet in person, It's too hard to really do a big project like that. But we're saving it for another time.
Next time I'll get involved too.
Yeah.
So I guess talking about that, the obvious reasons of the pandemic and so many of us teaching remotely, I'm sure that has had an impact. I'm curious with your students, the ones that you've had before that were part of that kind of 2-year going through a program, how are they adapting to be online? Do you think that this type of learning atmosphere in person has helped them with the transition online?
I have to say my upper level kids are pretty invested in that particular class. So they're very participatory on Zoom. That's the one class I know I don't have to worry about carrying or entertaining. It's very different when you
juggling,
yeah, right,
any of that stuff, yeah,
right. And it's still very student led. Like they're still making decisions about what we do next and what's going to work for them. So that's kind of why we tabled the global Create-a-thon, is because they decided that it really deserved, more oomph, and they just didn't have it in them to do it. They wanted something else for their learning. So they're still making choices. And I think one of the kids that originally participated in 9th grade, he got his artwork on the building. It was featured pretty prominently. Then he joined that particular advanced class in 10th grade. Now's his second year as an 11th grader. He's actually doing professional graphic design now for clients. And I watch him, and he doesn't blink. He's ready for the real world. He's doing the things that one would need to work with clients, to receive feedback, to let them know what his process is. It's pretty amazing to watch. So, yeah.
Yeah, building off that, I wanted to talk to you a little bit today about, like, where do your students go? How does this help them in the next stages of life? I know you talked about how a lot of this is to get students ready for careers, so they might not be on the path to college. Where do your students end up falling, and how does what they learn with you impact them?
I think a lot of them do go to college. Some of them major, like double major, like they'll do business and design, or maybe I've got...
It's a good combination. Yeah. I know someone.
Yeah.
I got my MBA, so I think that they kind of go hand in hand to me.
Yes, they do. I've had some go on and work, like I've got a kid now at UCLA in his second year in the film department. that's a really competitive.
I love it's so endearing when you call them your kids, because I try not to with my college students because I don't want them to.
They're not kids anymore.
They're not kids, but I love it.
He's not a kid anymore either, right?
No.
Well, he got into and he was one of the team leaders. So he was a team leader that first year that we were hugely successful. And I'm sure it looks fabulous on a resume to be like, hey, I was in charge of,
Absolutely. It's amazing.
I think a lot of them are currently in college right now pursuing graphic design or pursuing design of some kind in conjunction with other majors. So that's pretty awesome. I have one student who decided not to go on to college. He is running his own film production company.
Wow.
Right out of high school. He works with another local production company, so he's got his business going. So it's a variety of things. I've got a kid who took a gap year, and now he's getting all of his Adobe certifications done this year. I think he just started back to college this semester. So they're hugely motivated. They opt into those upper level classes, so we know that everybody there is really interested in some kind of career or some future in design. So it's super fun.
I know. I'd like to have them on some of my group projects. I'm sure they get into college and they're probably like, we got this. Like, we have it all figured out.
We're trained. And we've had Adobe people come and visit our classroom, and they're so impressed when they look at the Scrum boards and they listen to the students using real world vocabulary to manage the projects. They're basically, I believe someone said to me, you could drop those kids into any team right now at Adobe, and they do better than some of the adults that are on there.
Well, it is. I mean, that's kind of why I'm here today talking to you, and what I've been thinking a lot more in my classrooms is that these are the skills you need, and it's often more important than your design skills themselves.
And it's so not important to get the grade. I mean, all right,
let's get there. Let's get there. So let's talk about grades.
Don't tell my students I said that.
You just love grades, Lisa. So let's talk about grades.
I think transactional grading is the death of projects. It's like the worst thing that you could do for creative problem solving and for you. You miss all those powerful learning moments that happen when you have room to fail. Who was it? Francis Ford Coppola. We managed to get Francis Ford Coppola in to my classroom because he lives here.
That's amazing.
Right? So, film production class, right? They're supposed to...
How can it get better? I mean, that's it.
They're supposed to pitch their ideas to Francis Ford Coppola.
That's crazy.
And it was terrible. They did so poorly. I was so embarrassed. He'll never come back to my class.
What happened?
They weren't prepared. They didn't do the work. They were not professional. And then it was so high stakes that we had this huge conversation afterwards. Like, do you realize who that was and what a missed opportunity?
I mean, they might not know who he is. But...
They knew after that discussion. Here are the things that, like, let's dissect this. What would you have done differently given that was such a high pressure situation, right? And then let's redo it.
Okay.
Never mind Coppola and his people, right? We'll get new adults in that is a little lower risk, right? But you're going to redo it the way you would have done it if you were going to do it for him. And they redid it, and it was absolutely amazing.
Maybe he's listening. He's probably a big listener of my podcast. They were really good.
They were. Sorry you missed that part. But so... if there were transactional grades happening, that conversation never would have happened. That situation never would have happened because the teacher would be like, I don't want you to fail. It looks bad on me if you fail, right? If you get it, my principal is going to come knocking on my door. My dean is going to be like, what's going on, right? So the fact that we don't do transactional grading, you don't hand in this finished product in order to get a grade. It's a constant conversation every couple of weeks. How are you doing?
Is that throughout your whole school, or is this just how you approach it in your
It's
classroom?
how I approached it. I totally broke all the rules, but I will say that New Tech Network recognized those two projects that we did nationally and wanted us to actually get up on the stage as a keynote speaker to talk about that process. They saw value in the way that we were grading, and the students got up and taught, a couple thousand educators from across the country, like, here's how we did grades in this particular project. So
yeah, we had an interesting thing at Temple because of the pandemic. They did give an option of pass-fail in the spring semester and kind of a little bit of that in the fall too. So I think it forced us all to think more again about grades. I mean, I wish we could just get rid of them all. I'm fine with pass-fail. I mean, that does it for me.
You can't just move to pass-fail, though. It has to be a high-risk, high-public event or something where there's something on the line and it's super exciting to do it so that you can get buy-in from the students, because otherwise pass-fail just is letting you off the hook. I don't have to do the work.
Sure.
But if you're meeting Francis Ford Coppola...
See, I think for me, in my classroom, it's like you're doing the work that's going to get you your job.
Right, exactly,
so
right.
That's the stake. Exactly. Like,
right.
It's going to be what you put into it.
Right.
And
you can't do that at the high school level. You really have to make it like a little more pizzazzy.
Right. Have you seen anyone else at your school, like, do any type of projects that kind of are similar, trying to achieve the same thing?
Yes, I definitely, there's some amazing things happening at New Tech. We've done a developed curriculum for Bill Dodd, who's our senator for across the state. Like, there's some really high stakes stuff that we've done that's super amazing.
Yeah, no, I know. It is definitely different what you can do in a college classroom, but whenever I talk to someone who was a teacher and is out of it, like, I just had this conversation with someone. They're like, I can never go back because of the grading. And I'm like, that stinks. Like,
how nice it is to not have to, like, there's no turn-ins. There's no paperwork. It's just a one-on-one conversation with a kid every couple of weeks.
We do that already in the design classroom. We're constantly critiquing and talking to them. But I do think that I can pick up a little bit of these conversations. And I love all the self-assessments. And I see how much value that can bring in.
And we relate it to dollars. So if you get 500 points or $500 every 2 weeks, it's 100 for written.
Now, are you using San Francisco money or?
Well, so we worked it out, like, your hourly rate for a high schooler was something like $66.
It's a little more than the minimum wage, huh?
A beginning graphic designer at the high school level making $66 an hour is ridiculous. Like,
yes.
So we used to say things like, "Are you earning that money? Because if you're not, get out of my classroom." Like, or, other students would be like, "I don't really think you're earning your hourly rate. Like, get together, get your feet off the desk, put the coffee away."
Can they get raises? Like, can they increase what their hourly wage is?
No.
Can they get it knocked down? You're not worth 66 anymore.
Yeah, I mean, well, that's the whole point. It's like, when you do the self-assessment, it's like, what did you earn the $100 or did you earn the $80? Like, it's not quite how the real world works, but it's close enough that it gets kind of exciting for students.
And then just in the future, are there any projects, are there any dream projects you were like, oh, I'd love to do this with my students? Anything you're drumming up that you can share?
Oh, man. It's really hard to dream during COVID, so I kind of...
Come on, you're my dreamer, Lisa. You always have these...
I struggle. I think I'm excited about next year's Light at Art Festival.
I'm sure it'll be even big. I feel like everything next year is going to be ramped up. If this all does, if we get vaccinated and we get there. But I feel like everyone's going to be so much more excited. I mean, the Light at Art Festival, I know that in the beginning, there was a lot more fears and not understanding how things got, transmitted, but it feels like something that could be done safely, even if there is still a pandemic.
Yes.
So,
and I think the fact that we're learning in a hybrid situation is the one reason why we're not doing big projects right now. It just doesn't work. But I will say that it's okay actually to go within. This is the in-breath, right? This is the time where we're introspective, where we're doing artwork that makes us feel, that we can process what's happening with the trauma in the world, that we can work on our skill sets. So we're really taking a breath in right now so that next year, holy moly, those kids are going to be so ready to do something really big again.
I know, and I need a good excuse to come out to Napa, so it's been a few years.
Doesn't Philadelphia have a lighted, like some kind of projected?
I know that during Christmas there is a big show on City Hall that's designed by a local firm. I don't know if I guess I have to look into it. If we have one that's...
I mean, ultimately, what I envisioned is that if we did a global create-a-thon, that we could make a traveling lighted art festival that just goes to all the major cities like Sydney and London and all the places that already have.
Philadelphia, all the major ones.
Louisiana has something. There's like, everywhere where you could do some kind of traveling show that's just like the kids' work from all over the world at every age.
Yeah, no, that would be amazing. That would be great. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Lisa, for talking to me today and sharing this with everyone.
You're welcome. My pleasure. It reminds me of all the good stuff that's waiting for us after the pandemic.
It's gonna happen. It will. There is a light.
Yes.
So, but thank you for being here, and I'm sure we will be talking soon.
Thanks.
Thank you all so much for listening. If you are enjoying our show, please post us a review on whatever podcast streaming platform you use. To learn more about us, check out our website at designtogetherpod.com.